March 5th, 2000 Russia, Novosibirsk. The sun rises slowly, its rays falling on the snow-covered streets. The city's residents gradually wake up and start getting ready for work. Some take a shower, others quickly drink their coffee. A similar morning was unfolding in Stanislav's apartment. After leaving the bathroom, he went to the kitchen, but suddenly he was disturbed by a strange smell. It was the smell of some kind of rotten flesh coming from under the sink. Stas was surprised, thinking, "God, what is that stench?" But a second later he realized exactly what was causing that nauseating smell. When he opened the cabinet under the sink, just as he suspected, Stas found the spoiled chicken carcass among a pile of other trash that he had thrown out a few days ago and forgotten about. Now, alarmed by such a smell, the man decisively pulled the trash bag out of the bin and carried it to the hallway. He immediately got dressed and went out into the stairwell with the chicken, and then out onto the street, Timiryazev Street, named after the Russian physiologist. Stanislav trudged to the garbage bins, his boots slapping heavily on the fresh snow. The slippery, rusty lever creaked under the weight of his foot, and the heavy lid obediently slid upward. Stas swung the bag with the chicken, wanting to get rid of it as quickly as possible, but it wasn't that easy. The old, stretched-out plastic bag couldn't handle the load and tore with a crunch before reaching the trash can. Stanislav cursed to himself. He wasn't exactly the most righteous person, but he didn't want to leave the spoiled chicken in the middle of the yard either. He had to pick it up with his hands, carefully and with a wide grip, otherwise it would have just fallen apart. Bringing the carcass to the bin, Stas opened it again and forced himself to lean over, reaching his hands inside to make sure he didn't miss. And suddenly he involuntarily glanced inside the bin and his breath caught. On the almost empty bottom lay a bag with the red inscription "Sugar." But it wasn't just the inscription that was red. The frayed edges of the bag were soaked with blood. Dark stains and streaks seeped across its entire surface. To complete the scene, part of someone's body was sticking out of the bag, an indistinct and mangled mix of skin and flesh. It was clearly sticking out by accident. Stanislav was far from being a biologist, but it was simply impossible not to recognize what it was. It was a dismembered human corpse. Stas couldn't believe his eyes. He blinked, but nothing changed. A white and red sugar sack and no smell at all. Later, this very detail would make it clear that the body had been dumped quite recently during the night. But let's rewind the tape way back. The year is 1935, September 24th. The West Siberian Krai, which has now split into several provinces, territories and republics. Mashkovsky district, which is still part of the Novosibirsk region. The village of Orsk, which is no different from thousands of other villages in the USSR. On this gloomy autumn day, a boy named Viktor was born. Viktor's parents loved him and as much as possible protected him. This village is only 67 hectares, which is like 14.5 red squares. That's why in Orsk almost everyone knew each other. However, for understandable reasons, the boy's childhood was very difficult. By the age of 10, he had already experienced a full taste of war, iron, blood and gunpowder. Nevertheless, he finished school, and after that he joined the army. After serving the required 3 years and gaining enough life lessons and experience, he returned to his native village. But life there didn't suit him at all. It didn't attract him in any way. What kind of decent future could be guaranteed in a place like his hometown? There was only one very attractive option left, to move to Novosibirsk. Viktor did just that. After becoming a resident of Novosibirsk, the man chose to get a job at the Novosibirsk semiconductor device factory. At that time it was an advanced and quite prestigious industry. He had an exceptionally technical mindset, that's why his results were impressive. Fokin's achievements were held up as an example to other workers. He was also awarded the title of model worker. At the end of the 1950s, Viktor got married. A daughter was born. In general, his whole life seemed, if not perfect, then at least normal. After retiring and many years of hard work, Viktor was awarded the title Veteran of Labor, perhaps the only responsible one. The difference between Viktor and the average man was that he outlived his wife. Usually, husbands die first.
1900.
The year 1988 was a disastrous year for Viktor. His beloved wife passed away, and this dealt an irreparable blow to his health. Fokin's daughter moved to Kirov, and he was left completely alone. Since then, he started drinking often, which led to a stroke. And obviously, after a stroke, it would be better for him not to drink, especially since he had syphilis and meningitis when he was young. But Viktor of course didn't care about that, and despite the doctor's orders, he kept drinking heavily and would lose self-control after a shot. And then something started happening to Fokin. Despite his health problems, the man remained sexually potent, and he was strongly attracted to the opposite sex. He simply suffered from sexual addiction and couldn't live without intimacy. After losing his wife, he tried to rebuild his personal life, but it didn't work out. Who would want a half-deaf, unkempt, sickly, alcoholic pensioner? And then Fokin decided to take a simpler approach. He started using the services of sex workers, befriending alcoholic women and homeless women. And so it seemed like what else could go wrong, but something did. In the mid-90s, Fokin's manhood failed him. From a sexual powerhouse, he turned into an impotent man, and no treatment helped him. However, a surprising dissonance arose. The pathological sexual desire only intensified with the dysfunction. He wanted intimacy even more. This is a discrepancy between desire and satisfaction.
Желание и возможность.
In the end, he didn't. And yet, Viktor Fokin discovered that he could experience pleasure in a different way. Title card 1996, Young April, snow is melting in the old park. And the cheerful psychophysiological roller coaster of 61-year-old Fokin starts up again. Once again, he is overwhelmed by desires that conflict with his abilities. And so, on one of those days, Fokin once again went to the train station in search of prey. At the train station, he started looking around. It's no surprise that soon he noticed another prostitute and decided to approach her. A 35-year-old prostitute was standing a little further away near the exit. Let's call her Katerina. By her appearance, it was perfectly clear. Viktor was just her type. Approaching Katya, Viktor used his favorite method of attracting attention. "Hi beautiful, are you local or just visiting?" After clearing his throat, Fokin boomed in his deep bass. "Yeah, I guess I'm not from around here," Katya said, a little embarrassed. "And I can do quite a lot," Viktor said with a smile. "Even better than that." "Do you have any relatives?" Viktor asked unexpectedly. "Not really anymore. Everyone's dropping like flies. If we go to my place, it's smarter to have a drink and a snack, and there are some more interesting things there." Fokin finished his solemn speech. At that moment, Katya smiled and it became clear. The interest was mutual, she agreed. They went to the parking lot and, getting into the white Moskvich, headed to Viktor's place. Arriving at Timiryazev Street, they went up to the apartment and shared the agreed upon meal. Vodka, fish, cucumbers, everything by the book. One word led to another, and a friendly conversation formed about the past, about life, about love, empty fantasies. After some time, as planned, Viktor politely invited the lady to bed. He still couldn't believe that his erection would never return. When they started foreplay, Fokin, as expected, showed no outward sign of arousal. But this time his patience finally ran out. Suddenly, more than ever before, he became painfully aware of his loss, that all his achievements were in the past. These thoughts drove him into a furious rage. When the guest, seeing that things couldn't go on, went to the bathroom, Viktor jumped out of bed, grabbed the first thing he could find, a shovel handle he had brought from the garage for repairs, and, swinging it, struck the woman on the back of the head, knocking her out. She collapsed on the bathroom threshold, her body blocking the entire doorway. Fokin continued to beat the girl with the wooden stick, but then he stopped and realized what was happening, but he wasn't scared at all. After bringing everything he needed from the kitchen and pantry, Viktor began dismembering the body in the bathroom using an ordinary kitchen knife and a handsaw. And suddenly, the unimaginable happened. While cutting up the corpse, Fokin experienced an incomparable pleasure. As he cut through the flesh and separated the meat, he felt satisfaction and a sense of triumph. Chopping up the victim's insides and flushing them down the toilet, he felt relief and a surge of energy. With particular excitement, he cut out the victim's breasts. Having dealt with everything that could be ground up, he wondered what to do with the snow. In the end, when night fell, he wrapped everything in bags, packed them into a bag and a cart, took them outside, quickly took them far from the house, and satisfied, threw them into the garbage containers. After returning home, he spent a long time cleaning up the traces of blood all over the bathroom, which, in general, didn't really bother him. So everything in the world was forgotten and his heart froze in his chest. For the first time, Viktor Fokin, a retiree whose favorite pastime would become taking lives, targeted prostitutes, the homeless, and drunkards. But he himself would call his activities something else. After what happened, Viktor realized that he really enjoyed this activity and he no longer planned to stop. Taking lives brought him the kind of pleasure he hadn't felt in a long time and had longed for so deeply. Nevertheless, he remained vigilant. He was careful and methodical. Fokin understood that he should choose only women of low social status from other cities who had as few loved ones as possible. No one needs them, and no one will look for them. This became his signature, choosing those whose disappearance would not attract attention. Fortunately for the Maniac, there were plenty of such people in the city. Besides, he knew from experience where to find them, at the Novosibirsk train station. The second killing wasn't long in coming. The exact date is unknown, but it was presumably at the end of the same year. It was winter. Fokin met Natalia, a woman about 50 years old. She was still languishing at the same train station. And then Viktor appeared, offering her, like everyone else, a drink, some food, and maybe something else. Natalia, whose name has been changed, agreed. At Fokin's place, they had a heartfelt conversation, downed a few shots, and shared stories about fate and life. All in all, they had a good time. After they finished drinking, Viktor suggested they have sex. He knew how things would turn out, but he wanted to try his luck one more time. Maybe he could actually enjoy this as well. Of course, nothing worked out. After a few minutes of trying, he told her himself to go to the bathroom. Damn it, I just can't do it. How old am I already? Well, it looks like that's it. I can't do it anymore. You should probably go to the bathroom. Natalia didn't find anything suspicious about it and went to take a shower. Fokin grabbed a knife from the table and stabbed Natalia in the right side, right in the liver. Natalia groaned. The Maniac pulled out the knife and blood started pouring from the wound. The victim's last word was a hoarse no. Then Fokin struck her in the neck. There was little left to do because the woman was already on the verge of death. Fokin let go of the knife, which obediently remained hanging from her neck, grabbed the limp body with one hand by the shoulder and the other by the head. He forcefully pushed Natalia against the doorframe. The victim's neck hit the door with the side where the knife was lodged. When it met an obstacle, it had no choice but to continue sinking deeper into the flesh. It happened in a split second. The bloodied knife came out a couple of centimeters on the other side of the neck. Natalia fell. Viktor admired the sight for a short while and then began to dismember the corpse. This time, Viktor first cut off the chest and then began to separate everything else. The affiliations remained the same. He flushed the internal organs down the toilet piece by piece and put the body parts into a bag. After waiting for nightfall, the Maniac packed everything into the Moskvich and took it to a convenient spot on the edge of the Arboretum, which on that side runs almost right up to Timiryazev Street. This park is crossed from north to south by the second Yeltsovka River. With its narrow floodplain, it lies in the middle of impenetrable thickets, and only occasionally do footpaths approach it from a steep slope. Leaving his car as close to the edge of the forest as possible, Fokin pulled out a shopping trolley and rolled it along the snowy path into the depths of the thicket, illuminated only by the dim moonlight. After he had walked about 50 meters, he saw a grim scene. The narrow river suddenly emerged sharply from behind the trees and appeared right in front of him. The solid forest abruptly ended in an almost sheer clay cliff from which dry branches and bushes stuck out. The icy surface, dusted with snow, reflected the light, but in some places black holes of open water gaped. Yeltsovka is a heavily polluted river. Industrial waste is dumped into it. In addition, part of the water flow moves through pipes underground, and when they run too close to the bottom, additional heating occurs. Taken together, these factors prevent the river from freezing completely, and it is dotted with spots of melted ice where dirty black water can be seen. Then the path slowly began to descend and a glow appeared ahead. Factory and sewage pipes hung over the dark water. When he reached them, Viktor decided to dump the body here. The river was as close as possible. He opened the bag and shook the sacks into the water. They rolled away, 3 splashes and then silence. The Maniac watched in fascination. For the next 10 minutes he walked back thoughtfully. He recalled his first springtime killing and realized that despite what the song says, sometimes April does come in December. Fokin was enjoying his activities more and more. He was becoming increasingly relaxed and felt more carefree. This would be the reason for his fatal mistake. But for now, everything was going as it should. In the summer of the following year, the Maniac decided that he needed to resume his hobby. Acting according to the same pattern, he seduced another girl. Let's call her Marina, the name has been changed. As they approached the house in the yard, the worn-out tire of the old Moskvich suddenly burst. Viktor managed to park, but for any serious use the car was no longer suitable. Fokin understood that the corpse, which would appear this evening, would have to be disposed of somewhere and somehow transported. But this serious problem didn't really bother him much. After drinking and socializing, he only suggested sex as a formality. He knew perfectly well that nothing would come of it. Afterwards, an interesting thought occurred to him. Now he wanted to drown the victim. Going into the bathroom, he spent a long time filling the tub with water. In the end, he added some shampoo so it would smell nice. Marina was offered a special kind of aromatherapy in the bath. Viktor said that he himself is not a young man anymore, that he knows folk remedies and sometimes relaxes with them himself, that water cleanses and takes your sins away, and that afterwards you feel a sense of lightness. After hesitating a little, she accepted the offer and went for the procedure. She had just undressed and settled into the water when Viktor knocked. He said he would bring some mint to help her relax, but he came in empty-handed. He calmly approached Marina and simply pushed her down. In the full bathtub, she went completely under the water. She suddenly grabbed the edges of the tub with her hands and Viktor grabbed her. The water splashed, Marina thrashed her legs, her head and chest jerking, bubbles came out of her mouth and nose. Holding her by the neck and knees, Fokin just smiled. After about 3 minutes of violent thrashing and a couple of scratches on the Maniac's body from the victim's convulsing hands, she took her last sharp, involuntary breaths and fell silent forever. After waiting another minute, Fokin took the heavy body out of the bathtub and began his favorite part, dismemberment. Having finished with that, he realized that he wouldn't be able to take it away by car as usual. The tire was flat. So he decided to spend the night at home with the corpse and in the morning take it out using public transport. After cleaning up, he went to bed, having first packed everything into bags and put them in a bag. The next day, he got up, did his morning routine, and went to the bus stop with the suitcase. After waiting with other people heading to their dashas for the right bus to Mochishchinskoye Highway, he got on and took a free seat. The suitcase barely fit at his feet. For the next half hour, many people had no idea that in such a large bag, the elderly man was not carrying vegetables or building materials at all. After getting off somewhere between the summer cottages and the forest, Fokin headed deeper inside. He wasn't concerned whether anyone saw him at that moment or not. After hobbling to a more or less secluded spot, he dumped the bags and gathered some branches. Nothing could be seen in the tall grass. Feeling at peace, he walked a bit through the forest parallel to the highway and came out onto it at another bus stop in the direction of home. This went on for another 3 years. He found homeless people and women selling themselves whom no one would look for, brought them to his place and took their lives. He left the bodies in forests, vacant lots, and even in dumpsters. One time in the fall, he took a body in a cart to the dumpsters near school number 24 and left it there. Fortunately, at that moment the students were on vacation and didn't witness the scene. In total, Fokin has 9 proven victims and 1 unproven victim. It was impossible to identify anyone. The bodies were completely mutilated and cut into pieces. Nevertheless, people found them. News started to feature notes and tickers about the discovery of dismembered bodies and descriptions of the victims. The criminal didn't even try to hide from the police, and sometimes even did the opposite. While enjoying his well-deserved retirement, the holder of the Veteran of Labor title sold goods on the side at the local market, not far from his home. To investigate, the head of the regional police department created a special investigative task force, but for a long time they couldn't understand the maniac's logic or get on his trail. The detectives checked people convicted of similar crimes, those suffering from mental disorders, employees of meat processing plants, morgues, as well as surgeons. Even if Fokin had come to our attention, we could hardly have suspected an ordinary-looking pensioner, said Sergei Demin, an investigator from the Novosibirsk region prosecutor's office. Fokin felt quite confident and believed that no one would catch him. Novosibirsk remained in this state of uncertainty for several months, but in March 2000 everything changed. He didn't even bother to take the body of his last victim, who was killed on March 5, 2000 far away. He simply threw it into a dumpster on his own street near his house. A little later, a man called the Zeltsovsky District Police Department of Novosibirsk. He found a sugar bag with human remains in the dumpster. The police resumed the search with renewed vigor. In the area where the body was found, the investigators examined every corner, every alley, every basement, and every bush. They visited about 1,000 apartments hoping to find witnesses, but they still had no success until the end of March. As reported by local media, the investigators tracked down the maniac thanks to his neighbor in his apartment building. She told the detectives that she saw Fokin near the dumpsters with a large bag right before another body was found in the trash bin. She had already seen his face and knew that he lived in a 2-room apartment next door. Viktor was soon found in the same building. Bloody clothes and murder weapons were scattered all over the apartment, and he himself came out to the police officers wearing women's underwear. He was eager to talk and hid nothing about what he'd done. He called himself a social cleanser who saves the world from homeless people, prostitutes, and various diseases. The story of Viktor Fokin differs from most serial killers in that his criminal career began at a very late age. Usually, such people show serious abnormalities even in their youth or at the age of 30 or 40. But here we see a person who lived a relatively normal life for decades. He worked, built a family, and was respected by those around him. Judging by the known circumstances, a combination of several factors played a key role. First, severe loneliness after the death of his wife, then alcohol abuse despite serious illnesses, followed by neurological problems, strokes, and other diseases that could affect brain function and self-control. And on top of all that, there was a painful contradiction between a strong sexual drive and the loss of the ability to fulfill it. For many people, such a situation becomes a source of depression or despair. But for Fokin, his pent-up feelings began to find another outlet. Aggression, humiliation, and sexual frustration merged into a single pathological system. The most unusual thing about his psychology is that the main source of pleasure gradually became not intimacy but violence. And if earlier taking a life was a way to release rage, then later the act of taking a life and dismembering bodies began to bring emotional satisfaction. This is a very important point because that's when the crime stops being a tool and becomes the goal. His attitude toward the victims is just as telling. He chose people whom he considered unnecessary to society. This allowed him to justify his own actions. Psychologists call this mechanism moral dehumanization. A person stops seeing others as individuals and starts perceiving them as trash, problems, or objects. It's especially telling that later he called himself a society's cleaner. Such ideas often arise in severe cases. They create their own moral system in which they are no longer considered criminals. On the contrary, they begin to see themselves as people supposedly doing useful work. Based on the combination of signs, the most likely diagnosis is a severe personality disorder with a pronounced sadistic component and necrosadistic tendencies, which were later, but more on that later, noted by the experts. At the same time, he retained the ability to understand what was happening, plan his actions, and cover up the traces of his crimes. Therefore, he was found to be sane. The most frightening thing about Fokin's story is that his monstrosity did not grow out of external aggression or madness. It grew out of a gradually deteriorating personality that, over the years, learned to find pleasure where a normal person would feel horror. And I have already talked on my Telegram channel about how to recognize a person who enjoys feeling power over others, sources and additional information. Sources and extra materials are linked below the video. The elderly maniac was detained right in his apartment and taken to the pretrial detention center. Doctors found that he had a disorder and necrosadism, although overall, the forensic psychiatric examination twice declared Viktor sane. He was clearly disliked in the pretrial detention center. A year later, the pensioner appeared in the regional court with a black eye. In April 2001, the trial of the maniac began in the Novosibirsk regional court. During the investigation, the pensioner ended up in the prison hospital. Fokin contracted tuberculosis in the pretrial detention center, and his other illnesses also worsened. When Fokin's daughter found out what had happened, she refused to defend her father and cut off all contact with him. She came to Novosibirsk only once to give testimony and then went back to Kirov. At the court hearing, the only person present on his side was Fokin's sister Nina. On May 24, 2001, Fokin was present in the small courtroom with a bandaged eye. They say he smelled bad, and he was wearing some kind of padded jacket. Before the verdict was announced, he cried and begged for forgiveness. He insisted that his victims had no value to society, called himself a scoundrel, and asked for forgiveness for the crime. "I took the lives only of degraded people, who could hardly even be called women. Homeless women, alcoholics like that are a nuisance to society," Fokin said in court. Judge Grigory Loginov read the verdict for more than 2 hours, during which Fokin, barely able to stand from weakness, frantically changed the batteries in his hearing aid. According to Russian law, Fokin could not be sentenced to the highest penalty due to his age. State prosecutor Alexander Usov asked the court to sentence him to 20 years in a strict regime penal colony. After the verdict was announced, Fokin himself didn't know how to defend himself. He only shouted, "Your honors, let me go. I won't do it again." The court did not let him go. He was sentenced to 19 years in prison instead of the 20 years requested by the prosecutor. But it turned out that the sentence became a life sentence. Viktor Fokin died of a heart attack in a prison cell at the Angas colony in 2003. This is the story of the Novosibirsk Grandpa Ripper. And here's another bonus case, you've probably never heard of it. On July 5, 1902, in the Italian village of Ferrere di Conco, 11-year-old Maria Goretti, a devout Christian, was sitting on the porch of her house, shielding herself from the scorching sun with her hand. She was mending a shirt while her mother worked in the threshing yard, and her brothers and sisters played near the threshing machine. Suddenly, the shadow of a man appeared before her on the sun-scorched ground. The 20-year-old neighbor, Alexander Serenelli, was approaching the girl, clearly with bad intentions. Making sure that all of Maria's relatives were elsewhere, he picked her up and dragged her into the house. There, Alexander threw the girl onto the bed and began tearing off her clothes. Maria screamed loudly, but the joyful shouts of the children and the noise from the threshing machine drowned out her cries. Then she began to push her attacker away from herself and, trying to look him straight in the eyes, kept repeating, "God does not want you to commit this sin, or else you will go to hell." Alexandra did not listen to what she was saying and shoved a gag into her mouth. Meeting desperate resistance, he forgot about his original intention and, in a rage, began slashing the girl with a knife. When everything quieted down, Maria was lying on the floor, bleeding from 14 stab wounds. Trying to cover her nakedness with fragments of her torn clothes, the girl said, "Alessandra forced me to do shameful things, but I didn't want to." Maria was taken to the hospital in hopes of saving her, but the 2-hour surgery did not bring the expected results. As she was dying, the victim found the last of her strength to tell the priest that she forgave Alessandra. "For Jesus' sake, I hold no grudge against him. Let him meet me in heaven, may God forgive him." After saying this, the girl closed her eyes. With thick light brown hair, a pale face, and long eyelashes that forever hid her lively and pure gaze, she looked like an angel. Maria Goretti was posthumously canonized. Her tormentor, Alessandro Serenelli, after 30 years of imprisonment, repented for his actions and became a monk. 90 years later, on January 21, 1992, in the Spanish city of Burgos, 23-year-old Marta Abregan was returning home after praying in a chapel. She was an energetic, charming young woman who radiated light wherever she went, and she was always eager to help others. She was studying at the Faculty of Journalism at the University of Madrid. Born into a Catholic family, Marta always remained faithful to God and grew in virtue as she navigated the hardships of growing up. She used to be in a romantic relationship with a young man who was also deeply religious, but he did not accept her missionary zeal, and so they broke up. On that January day, Marta had almost reached the door of her house when she suddenly noticed a strange man. He stood by the entrance, never taking his eyes off her. The girl decided to stay calm and walk past, but the stranger suddenly ran up to her and grabbed her, then forced her into his car despite Marta's resistance. It was Pedro Luis Gallega. As soon as the girl was in the back seat, the car started moving. Gallega drove as fast as he could to the nearest farm, where he thought no one would be able to interfere with his plan. After reaching his destination, the man got out of the car and forced Marta to get out as well. He threw her to the ground and began to take off her clothes. The devout girl couldn't endure this, and so she put up a fierce fight against Gallega. The man held her hands tightly, pressing his whole body against her, but she didn't give up and kept resisting. Then Gallega became enraged, pulled out a knife, and aiming at the left side of her chest began stabbing Marta again and again. The girl's naked body was found 6 days after the attack. It was lying on the outskirts of the city. Marta had received 14 stab wounds. One of the blows struck the center of her heart. The girl's parents struggled to cope with their overwhelming grief. Those present at the funeral couldn't help but notice the face of the deceased. It looked serene and radiated light, just as it had in life. Marta's face, framed by golden curly hair, remained beautiful. In its delicate features, there was something noble and elevated. As he was leaving the funeral, the girl's father thanked the guests and said that no matter how much he grieved, there was still no room for hatred in his heart. In 2007, Archbishop Francisco Gilgeleno from Burgos, together with other members of the diocesan council, decided to canonize Marta Abregan, because she died defending her chastity just like the girl from Italy Maria Goretti. Several months passed after this crime by Pedro Luis Gallega. Summer had already arrived in Spain, and on a hot July day, 17-year-old Leticia Librata, who had come with her family on vacation to the province of Valladolid, wanted to take a walk through the streets of the small town of Viana de Sega. The young girl with a pleasant appearance unfortunately caught the attention of some visitors. She was unlucky to be in the same place where he was looking for a new victim. The maniac grabbed Leticia. Unfortunately, she was unable to escape. After that, just like with Marta, he put her in his car and drove her to a pine forest nearby. There, Gallega, despite the girl's resistance, sexually assaulted her several times, beat her, and in the end inflicted 11 stab wounds on Leticia, one of which caused her death due to a punctured lung. Leticia's body was found in the same pine forest. The girl's hands were handcuffed and her pants were pulled down. When they learned that their daughter was no longer alive, Leticia's parents fell into a prolonged and deep depression from which they have not been able to recover to this day. The criminal responsible for taking the lives of 2 young girls was arrested on November 17, 1992 in the large Spanish city of La Coruña. For 3 months he managed to evade the police, but this time, surrounded by more than 10 officers, the maniac was unable to escape. Even the revolver he was gripping tightly in his hands didn't help. Pedro Luis Gallego was born in the province of Valladolid on November 13, 1957. It is known that even as a small child he entered a religious school, and after graduating from it he studied mechanics and specialized in elevator repair. In 1976, Gallego began committing sexually motivated crimes. At first, he terrorized the female residents of Castile, Leon, and later Madrid. Some of the victims went to the police, so on 3 separate occasions between 1979 and 1982, Gallego spent time behind bars for short periods. In 1983, he ended up in prison again, and this time he forced another inmate to masturbate right in front of him, for which he was also convicted. In 1985, Gallego was released. He settled in the city of Alicante and had a great chance to forget his criminal past, but his depraved fantasies prevailed over common sense. Soon he sexually assaulted a tourist from Belgium. The maniac's record also included car thefts. Taking advantage of his position as a mechanic, Gallego came up with a cunning plan. Now he waited for girls and young women in various buildings near the elevators. Then he impatiently counted the seconds until a potential victim entered the elevator, followed her, and sexually assaulted her while threatening her with a weapon. In total, there were about 18 such incidents. In 1987, the maniac was sentenced to 10 years in prison again. 3 years later, he was placed in the psychiatric ward of the Seville prison hospital. There, he regularly did cleaning and even studied, so Gallego's prison term was reduced to 5 years out of the original 10. In 1992, after his release, Gallego committed 2 fatal attacks on Marta Abregan and Leticia Librata. This is where the crimes of the maniac related to the 20th century end. He was arrested in 1992. He confessed to taking the lives of Leticia and Marta, but persistently denied sexually assaulting them. In addition, the list of Gallego's possible victims included a 6-year-old girl, Laura Domingo Alonso, whose lifeless body was discovered in April 1991. However, his involvement in this crime was not proven. Pedro Luis Gallego was sentenced to 328 years in prison. Thus, the so-called elevator maniac was supposed to remain behind bars forever, if not for one thing. In 2006, Spain adopted the so-called Parrot Doctrine, which restricted prisoners' rights to possible early release. In 2013, the Parrot Doctrine was abolished, and more than 100 dangerous criminals were released from prison. Among them was Pedro Gallego. Once free, the maniac changed his appearance, but there were no changes in his worldview. One day in Madrid, he noticed two young women and at gunpoint forced them into his car, then sexually assaulted the two women. When Gallego appeared in good old Valladolid, the locals, well aware of who he was, even started creating graffiti expressing open protest against his being free. In January 2017, Gallego returned to Madrid and tried to kidnap a young woman, but because there were witnesses nearby, she managed to escape from his grasp. Sometime later, he attacked another woman and this time took her to the city of Segovia, where he sexually assaulted her about 5 times. After the sexual act, Gallego took a shower so that no traces of biological material would remain on his body and then took the captive back to Madrid. In April of the same year, the maniac committed a new attack near one of Madrid's hospitals. He saw a young woman, hit her several times on the head with a pistol and forced her into his car. This woman was lucky. She managed to escape from her attacker. Gallego committed his last crime on April 14, 2017. Following his usual pattern, he threatened a young woman with a weapon, kidnapped her, tied her hands, and taped her eyes shut. At a gas station in Las Rosas, the victim was sexually assaulted. Then the maniac took her to his house in Segovia, where he kept the victim captive for another 6 hours, periodically forcing her to have sexual intercourse with him. In the end, Gallego forced her to take a shower and washed himself as well, after which he took the woman to Madrid and left her on one of the streets. After that, in June 2017, the maniac was arrested again. Nearly 100 pieces of evidence were collected against him. In 2019, Gallego learned that he now definitely faced 96 years in prison. This news shocked him so much that he tried to commit suicide by taking a high dose of barbiturates, but it was in vain. After this incident, Spain adopted a special anti-suicide protocol, if you know what I mean, which involves constant monitoring of prisoners. By the way, at the court hearing, Pedro Gallego admitted that he regretted what he had done, especially taking the lives of 2 young girls. He tried to justify his actions by unexpectedly telling everyone present that his main victim was himself. The maniac regretfully noted that he is always haunted by obsessive ideas that he is unable to control. Write in the comments what you think, like or dislike. Watch other videos on the channel. And for those who listen this far, a polite driver will give way to you next week. And also check out Telegram and the services with exclusive additional content. There is both free and subscription-based content there. There you can see the scariest video on Strashnota, which can't even be published on YouTube. You can watch videos about the most unusual ways to end one's life. There's also a quiz called True Crime Fan or Already a Suspect. 10 ways to quickly calm down during a moment of anxiety. And I made a solid piece that answers the question of what loving true crime means and what it does to people. Myths, statistics, interesting facts, and useful conclusions. In short, check it out. All the links are below the video. Oh, and I'm even preparing an exclusive video about the Inquisition. Most likely it's already out. That's it.